Can you hear me now? Good, good. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming and belated Happy New Year. I'm Vicki Robledo. I'm Vanessa's assistant, and I'll be your host this evening. Please hold all questions until after the presentation, and be sure to wait for a microphone so we can hear your question. This presentation is being recorded and will be put up on our website for those who aren't able to attend and for all of you who'd like to see it again. Before we start, I want to introduce Craig Fraley from the Clark County Credit Union. Craig and the credit union have been our sponsors since the beginning, and we could not do this without them. So please give a warm welcome to Craig.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Doctor. Good to see you again. We are the Medical Field Credit Union. We're very happy to sponsor these neighborhood health series. And some of you have heard me say this before, but if you ever have an allergic reaction to big banks, we are the cure. So we are not for profit. We are owned by our membership. We have some things with us you will not find elsewhere. For example, we have a checking account, and you know how much a checking account pays in interest usually? 0. Ours pays 5.12% up to the first $25,000, one of the highest in the country. So if you have money sitting in a savings account, it's not earning anything, just throw it in that checking account. It earns 5.12%. You can visit us online at ccculv.org and have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thank you, Craig. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Manas Mandal, who will be speaking this evening on the road to organ transplantation and factors impacting successful outcomes. Dr. Mandal is a professor and Fulbright scholar here at Roseman University of Health Sciences College of Pharmacy. He is also adjunct faculty at the JSS AHER Mysuru and BITS Pilani Goa campus in India. His expertise is immunology, teaching, and research. Dr. Mandal received his PhD in science from the Jadavpur University in India and did his postdoctoral research at the University of Chicago and the University of Michigan. He held research faculty positions at the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy and Virginia Tech's College of Veterinary Medicine. He was engaged in vaccine research and cancer immunotherapy at the University of Michigan and biodefense research at Virginia Tech. Dr. Mandal is the recipient of the prestigious Fulbright U.S. Scholar Program, Egypt, All Disciplines Award binational for the academic year 23-24. He taught at the Helwan University Faculty of Medicine and Pharmacy in Cairo. In 2019, he was awarded Fulbright Specialist Appointment by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs to teach a course on molecular immunology at BITS Pilani Goa campus in September 2022. Dr. Mandal has published peer-reviewed research articles in major immunology and pharmaceutical journals. He serves as editor for the Ames Microbiology Journal and reviewer for scientific articles, grants, awards, and professional meeting submissions. He is professionally associated with the AACP, AAPS, AAI, NAPB, ACPE, and the U.S. Fulbright Program. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Mandal.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thanks to our sponsor, the Clark County Credit Union. Without them, this program would not have the financial support. All right. Microphone check. Do you hear me over there, Rachel? All right. Okay. I will take it as yes. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So let's talk about the match. The match for organ transplant. And the road for this match, means leading up to this match, is difficult. It's not easy. But it still can be achieved, and it is done, has been standardized, and it saves lives. That's the most important thing. So let's delve into the different aspects and the outcomes for organ transplantation. At Roseman University of Health Sciences, I am associated with College of Pharmacy, as you have heard. I am also an adjunct faculty with the College of Dental Medicine, and upcoming College of Medicine, hope to be. And I also teach at Touro University's PA program and DO program as an adjunct faculty. As an immunologist, I know this is a journey which is kind of littered with success and also with many difficulties. We will talk about both success and difficulties and the processes for a perfect match and perfect outcome in the context of an organ transplant. What I was going to say in the context of Roseman University, I got kind of diverted, is that at Roseman University, in all the academic units or colleges, we adopt a learning objective-based teaching pedagogy, meaning whatever we teach to our students, that has a final goal. So following that tradition of teaching my students, these are the learning objectives, meaning these are the things we are hoping to learn at the end of my seminar today. We'll begin with the need for organ transplant. Why do I or someone else need an organ transplant? And what are the organs that are most in demand? Then comes the difficult part, the barriers. It's not an easy task to accomplish a successful transplant. It requires a diverse team of experts to come together for a transplant and successful outcome of it. That brings to the compatibility between a donor who donates the organ and the recipient who needed that organ, that match. Why we need that match? Because we want to avoid the most dreaded word in the domain of organ transplant is rejection. So the question becomes, what do we have at our disposal to prevent that organ rejection? Because it's a very, very hard task to find an organ. And I will show you the data and statistics, how many people right now in US are in the waiting line to receive a kidney or a liver or a heart as a transplant. What has been found to be successful is after the patient and donor goes through a matching process or processes, the transplant recipient, the patient, is put on immunosuppressive drugs so that the patient's immune system does not outrightly reject the donated organ. But that has its own saga. I will talk about that, the saga of putting on immunosuppressant regimens for a long period of time, toxicities, and various other aspects. That brings to the number 6, last learning objective is xenogenic transplant. That is the new kid in the block. It's very new. If you are following popular press in last several years, particularly in 2023 and 24, there has been many reports of kidney, liver transplant happened where a recipient received the transplant from a donor animal. Yes, a donor animal. We will review that to end my seminar. So let's look at this case study. 45-year-old woman with end-stage renal disease due to type 1 diabetes underwent renal transplant from a living but unrelated donor. Every word in that sentence has a meaning. The transplanted organ came from a living individual, not from a cadaver or a deceased individual. And it came from an unrelated donor. That refers to something. It refers, essentially, there will be genetic differences between the donor and the recipient, meaning there could be a risk for transplant rejection. Anyways, after 1 month of after transplant, her urine output, kidney function decreased, first sign of a possible rejection episode. She developed tenderness, pain, swelling at the graft site, as well as non-specific symptoms of fever, decreased appetite, and myalgia, like overall not feeling well, body ache without infection. Those are all the signs, early signs of an imminent organ transplant rejection. Immunologic process, symptoms of acute graft rejection, confirming the diagnosis, a renal biopsy must be performed, observation. She is going through acute graft rejection. These are the underlying treatment, intensive immunosuppressive drugs. I am not going through the details of the drugs. They are usually used in combination and for many, many years after transplant is done, so that the recipient's immune system does not outrightly reject the transplanted organ. That brings the problem. Yeah, even your arms and legs is eaten up or attacked by a shark, still you got a kidney. And your brother is out there so that he can get that kidney. That is the problem. So what is organ failure? When one or several vital organs in our body not working properly and our life depends on normal functioning of those organs. That's the simplest definition of organ failure scenario. This can happen suddenly, acutely, or gradually through a chronic disease condition such as type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Ultimately, many of the uncontrolled type 2 diabetic patients would have compromised renal function, unfortunately, but may end up kidney failure. In general, these organ failures are staged or graded up to 1 through 4 or 5. Grade 4 or 5 are considered the most critical end-stage organ failure situation in that individual. And what are those organs? Liver, kidney transplant, liver, kidney, heart, brain, lung, and also, yes, small intestine. When the patient is nearing to the end stages, meaning grade 4 or grade 5 of organ failure stage, to keep them alive, we need to have those organs transplanted with a sufficiently functioning organ. That's the fundamental basis of organ transplant. So what are the symptoms of this organ failure? It's a whole list of symptoms. There is not a single symptoms. Oftentimes, it matches having some type of non-descriptive infection, bacterial infection, viral infection, or mixed infection, weakness, fatigue, drowsiness, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, fast, shallow breathing, fast or irregular heartbeat, fever, chills, swelling of the extremities. That kind of refers to the kidney damage, kidney failure, or heart failure. Persistent chest or pain or abdominal pain. Taken together, many of these symptoms can be observed, can be found due to many infections in us. But these are the hallmark of a patient's organ failure. That brings us to the need discussion. And these are the hyperlinks. If you access this presentation online, you can click on this hyperlink that will take you to the respective websites. These are the leading websites in US and in the world. You will find more detailed, specific information if you need to get into those informations. Need is organ transplant that we have already established. This is the only form of treatment for most end-stage organ failure. There is not really anything we can do to keep the patient alive and have their normal physiological function reasonably going on. We need to have the failed organ replaced or transplanted with a sufficiently functioning organ. But Problem with that is the need for those transplant far outstrips the numbers of those available donated or people willing to donate their organs. That is one of the major issue in this scenario. These donated organs can come from healthy living individual. We have 2 kidneys. I can donate 1 kidney. Still, I should be all right going on with my regular activities in my life. 1 kidney should be sufficient for me. Or at the end of my death, I already have signed in our auto registration information page that my organs will be donated. So organ donation can come from a live individual, healthy, or when that individual is deceased, dies, their organs can be harvested within certain window of time to be transplanted into a recipient. How it is done? It is a very, very complicated procedure or process, but it has been fine-tuned in US. There is a national computer matching systems, and that comes with a very strict code of ethics, and they adhere to absolutely highest standards, meaning a millionaire cannot go out and buy a kidney in US. They usually travel outside US. We hear those stories that people travels to certain countries in the world where people are willing to donate a kidney for $50,000, but that can't happen in US. They are matched, organs are matched by tests. We'll talk about the tests, organ size, medical urgency, how urgent this individual needs that kidney or the liver, waiting time, and geographical location of the country. So it's a very tiered, complicated, but very well-tuned matching system. A computer database is maintained by different organizations such as UNOS, FDA, and other regulatory agencies. Usually, kidneys are the organs that are in the shortest supply and in highest demand. And here's the journey, road for the matching or the match. A patient need for transplant has been identified or established. Patient would be enlisted or entered into the computer data system. Then a donor would be identified. Perhaps the donor is already been registered with the donor website. Then begins the waiting period. So almost like waiting for Godot, if you have ever watched that film, old film. Then there will be matching test. Once we come to the close of that, yes, you are now about to receive, meaning your waiting list has came to the end and there is a donor available, then begins the matching processes. Will that be donated organ or the donor immunologically or antigenically competent to the recipient? That's $1 million question, but we got to answer that question there. That refers to the matching tests. Then offer will be sent, evaluated, accepted, organ reserved, organ transported, transplant happens, and then post-transplant data is monitored by these agencies. So the road is really a long one, and it's a convoluted road. It's not a very straight US 95 or I-15 type of thing. It's more of a, if you ever cross the Virgin River Gorge on I-15 North, it's that twisted and that difficult to navigate. Let's look at some numbers. These are the statistics of organ transplant. About 105,000 men, women, and children are right now on the national transplant waiting list. This is the data I extracted about within last 5 days at the max 1 week old data. Out of them, 46,000 transplants were performed in 2023. About 17 people die each day waiting for an organ transplant. And yes, each of us can save 8 lives. If we pledge to donate our organs, when we renew our car registration at DMV. Again, these are the websites. You can click on these links, get the full information if you wish to be a donor. Like I would like to donate my organ upon my death, and so that someone can be benefited and I can save a life. Other numbers in organ transplant, kidney tops the list in terms of demand, followed by liver, heart, lung, and that the top graph bar diagram shows kidney about 27,000, followed by liver, little over 10,000, then pancreas, kidney, and heart, over 4,500, lung, 3,000, and patients waiting to receive these organs, also topped by kidney, followed by liver, then kidney, pancreas combined, heart, lung, and etc. So here is in terms of demand of organ transplant, this is the hierarchy, kidney followed by liver, heart, and lung nationwide. Ethnicity, Caucasians do receive highest organ transplants. That's on the right-hand side. Left-hand sides, of course, the Caucasians tops the chart in the waiting list to receive a transplanted organ, followed by Black, Hispanic, Latinos, and Asians, and etc. Now let's talk about the problems with organ transplant. In one word that can be described, rejection. After all those waiting, matching, surgery, very complicated surgery, not many hospitals are equipped to do a transplant surgery. Very few actually, because you need a team of physicians, pharmacists, and other care providers specialized in specific nephrology or cardiac medicine or other areas, pulmonologist for lung transplant, etc., along with surgeon, specialized to transplant that organ. But even with all these things, what really comes down to, will this transplanted organ be accepted by the recipient? Because there is a high chance of rejection, meaning due to host, means the individual, the patient who received the donated transplanted organ. For example, I need a kidney transplant, for example. Okay, I did wait for several years. I did receive a donated kidney in my body through those surgeries and etc. Chances are that some of the white blood cells that I have in my body, in my circulation, that keeps me disease-free, fighting against infection, those same white blood cells will go out, fight out that donated kidney that came to my body to replace my defective kidney. That's the rejection. And it happens due to host. I'm the host, I'm the recipient, versus donor who donated that kidney and that is now transplanted in me, genetic differences. Yes, we are all Homo sapiens, but we are all genetically different. Even I am genetically different from my brother and sister, because our genes, my genes, and my brother and sister's gene came from, half from my mom, half from my dad. And they are not equally distributed. Only homozygotic twins, or so-called Siamese twins, have the closest genetic makeup. Other than that, everyone else is genetically quite different. Therefore, through those genetic differences, that's called allogeneic gene expression. White blood cells in the recipient's body will mount an attack towards the grafted tissue-specific antigen, leading to the rejection, discarding of the grafted or donated tissue. That grafted organ is viewed by the host immune system as a foreign source of antigenic stimulation and is attacked, leading to the transplant or graft rejection due to allogeneic, meaning differences into the genetic expression between these two individuals, and that leads to rejection. And it is defined technically host versus graft response that cause transplant rejection, primarily due to the differences in HLA, human leukocyte antigen, is a class of antigen that are expressed all over our body, on all the cells of our body, particularly on white blood cells. The differences in those HLA antigenic structures, they all look alike, something like this, but there are pockets or there are detailed amino acid differences between you, me, and my brother and sister. Through that genetic differences, my white blood cells will attack the grafted organ that I have received even after the match. That is the problem. There is another type of rejection episode can happen in the context of transplant, which is known as graft versus host reaction, GVHD. It results when donor organ specific white blood cells, meaning if I'm receiving a kidney or a liver transplant, there got to be some white blood cells coming into my body that resides within those transplanted organs. There is a protocol. Prior to transplant, those organs are flushed out to clean up out of any white blood cells that may remain there. But still, there are some that cannot be eliminated. Now, those white blood cells that came into my body through those grafted organs or tissues will now attack my tissues and organs and antigenic structures. That is defined as graft versus host disease, particularly observed in bone marrow transplant patients. So this is the problem of organ transplant, rejection. Without going into the details of this is one of the most critical and difficult areas to handle in the context of clinical science, such as clinical immunology, immunogenetics, and most difficult surgical maneuver also. Various ways organ transplant is a difficult procedure, process, and whole approach due to these subtle nuances that makes the recipient outrightly reject or slow rejection of the grafted tissues. So what are the different time frames this rejection can happen? It can happen in 3 different time frames. In hyperacute rejection, rejection would or could occur within minutes through hours, primarily through antibody. Antibodies are some white blood cell, B cell mediated protein molecule that usually protects us against COVID infection, pneumococcal infection, seasonal influenza infection. But those antibodies, particularly when they're directed towards those HLA antigens, they can outright mount an attack and go for hyperacute rejection within minutes through hours after the transplant surgery has happened. Then comes acute rejection, which is slightly slower, unfolds through days and weeks, initiated by allo. Allo means different T cell population between the donor and the recipient. That takes a little longer time. Whereas chronic rejection is observed in months through years. That's a very, very long time frame, usually happens within the first year of transplant. That's the most difficult period. Usually, if a patient after transplant surgery has happened goes through the first year reasonably well, then there is a chance that, high chance that the patient will accept and keep the transplanted organ in his or her body and will restore that transplanted organ, will restore the normal physiological function in that patient. But within the first year, there is the highest risk, and that is the chronic rejection, months through years. Usually, if it has happened, would happen, it will happen within first year, at the max by year 3. So these are the 3 different time points. A transplanted organ, donated organ, can be rejected by the recipient. These are some numbers. Overall, 3-year survival rate for solid organ transplant is about 90%, which is a very high number. And within that 90%, these are the number of years. Kidney, about 22 years, liver, 20, heart, little low, 14 years, about 15, and lung, about 9.5 years. 3-year transplant survival rates are better than 1 year, meaning the first year is the most difficult year in the context of accepting or rejection of the grafted tissue or organ. And median survival after transplant is about 18 years, which is not a small time. But there are difficulties associated with that median survival of 18 years for a transplanted organ. So what do? I have established the problem. I have showed the roadmap to reach the goal. Let's talk about the goal, the prevention measures. The match. The match refers to 3 different types of tests that are essentially done at the beginning of a transplant surgery would happen. These 3 tests are ABO blood group antigen test, human leukocyte antigen HLA matching or tissue typing, or tissue cross matching, where it is determined whether the recipient would have an antibody that will cross-react or bind to the donor-specific white blood cells. So we all have red cells in our body that provides us oxygenation and etc. Those red cells are very, very important because they have some surface antigens. Predominant surface antigens on red blood cells are ABO group of red cell antigen. They got to be matched through a simple checkerboard type of tests, and we've got to make sure that, and it's very easily done. It's done in 10 minutes. It got to be matched by mixing patients, means recipients, red blood cells with standard serum that contains anti-A or anti-B antibody. And here is a checkerboard type of test. And that's the first test we got to do between the donor and the recipient. We've got to make sure that they both has the same red cell antigen. Next comes HLA, human leukocyte antigen, which is one of the most critical matching element, and it is very difficult to match because no matter how close we come with human leukocyte. So once again, what is human leukocyte antigen? Leukocytes are the white blood cells that fights the disease in us, T cells, B cells, and etc. They also express certain antigens. They are called human leukocyte antigen, and that varies between me, you, my brother, my sister, and myself. What I can do if I want to receive an organ from you or from my brother or sister, I can only go for a close match. Absolute match is almost impossible to achieve other than Siamese twins or zygotic twins. But still, we do try. And here's the clinical data when there was 0 mismatch in HLA antigens. And these antigens, they look alike, but they have different subtle expression in different individuals that is defined as alleles. When those differences are 0, means then transplant recipient would have a renal allograft 5-year survival about over 75%. Yes, like cancer, 5-year survival is the gold standard for a transplant. But as the HLA alleles mismatch goes up from 0 to 6, the 5-year kidney survival goes down to around 60–65%. That brings the necessity of having closer the similarity between donor and recipient HLA antigen. A positive transplant outcome is indicated. What are the specific HLA antigens? HLA-A, B, HLA-DQ, DR. These are the most important HLA antigen in terms of transplant match and resultant success. Next come tissue cross-matching. It essentially determines that if I am the recipient, do I have an antibody in my circulation, in my plasma, that would bind to the white blood cells that is coming into my body through the donated organ? If the answer is yes, we can't go for that transplant with that organ. It will be outrightly rejected. So these are the three sets of tests are done in combination for every transplant, be it a kidney, heart, lung, liver, or small intestine. But every transplant has its own algorithm. But these are the three tests overall performed to find the closest match. Still, it's not a perfect match. There's a gap. Through the gap window comes the problem. To solve the problem, we depend on immunosuppressant, meaning we put the patient, transplant patient, under immunosuppressive drug treatment. These drugs were developed to block or dampen the host immune responses to the transplanted organs or grafts. What it does, it increases the chance to accept the transplant by the recipient. What are these drugs? Some of these drugs will impact or affect T lymphocyte function. Some of them will impact both T and B lymphocyte function. And these are very established, reasonably old drugs that work very well, that will suppress immune responses in the recipient so that the grafted tissues or organs can be accepted, will not be outrightly rejected. Meaning, if my immune system, immune cells are rejecting, attacking the grafted organs and tissues, if I can dampen, inhibit my immune response, then there is a chance that I will keep the donated organ for a longer period of time. That's the whole idea. Idea is good, but it comes with a price. That's the consequence of immunosuppression. Increased risk of infection, especially opportunistic infection. Opportunistic infection refers to some of the infections that usually we would not suffer when we do have sufficient immune response. We are not under an immunosuppressive regimen, or we are not an immunosuppressed individual to begin with, such as many fungal infection, cytomegalovirus infection, Epstein virus, Barr virus, EBV, CMV. We all are carrier of them, but they don't cause any disease. But when our immune system is suppressed due to the immunosuppressive drug use so that we can accept the grafted organ or transplant, then those subdued pathogens, they become virulent. And that may lead to various risks of infection and cancer. Yes, cancer is a high risk for transplant patients who are under immunosuppressive drug regimen for a long period of time, because our white blood cells protects us against infection, also against cancerous development throughout our life. When we inhibit them, that increases our vulnerability not only towards various infections, but regarding development of various cancerous growth in our body. Those are the prices. And of course, other types of toxicities, particularly nephrotoxicity, kidney toxicity due to cyclosporine or tacrolimus specific immunosuppressive drug use. And here, some of the drugs, I will not go into the details of these drugs. Particularly, they are categorized under calcineurin inhibitors. Cyclosporin is such a drug that inhibits an enzyme, calcineurin, and when it was introduced in 1983s, you can see the survival of the graft with the usage of immunosuppression drug cyclosporin exponentially went up until very recently. Then there are sirolimus, there are daclizumab, there are different types of drugs, all impact T cell function, and there are other category of drugs that impact both T and B cell functions, such as steroids. These are effective immunosuppressive drugs, essentially reduce inflammation, inhibit leukocyte, means white blood cell attack, migration, suppresses both B and T cells. And There are other drugs. Deliberately, I do not want to go into details of those drugs, but I can talk to you if you have interest in learning them at the end of this talk. And this is the overall view where these drugs, when they are used in the context of a transplant surgery or other way, when we want to immunosuppress someone, how they work. These are the detailed areas, how these drugs work. Would not go into the detail due to the interest in time. And taken together, this is the data. It shows various different organs such as kidney, pancreas, liver, intestine, heart, and lung. What are the combination drug and the percentage of individual that received those transplants, those drugs in combination have been used. So without reading the full chart, you can see tacrolimus, 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 and along with tacrolimus, we have steroids, mycophenolate mofetil, MMF. This is the combination. Usually cyclosporin or tacrolimus, along with various prednisone or steroid, that is the mainstay of immune suppression. And certain times there will be another synthetic analog of purine, such as mycophenolate mofetil, that can be added into this milieu of immunosuppressive regimen. How long a patient got to be on this regimen? Unfortunately, lifelong. Dosages can be tapered, and it is lowered as the days and years progressed or progresses after the transplant surgery, but most likely, majority of the transplant individuals will be under some type of immunosuppressive drug regimens. That brings other practitioners, medical practitioners, into the consideration that if it's a nephrotoxic drug, such as cyclosporin or tacrolimus, I got to consult a nephrologist to monitor my kidney function test every 6 months to a year. So these drugs suppresses the recipient's immune system so that the transplanted organ is not outrightly rejected, but it brings another aspects in their life that you are always vulnerable for toxicity, you are always vulnerable for infection, and also vulnerable for development of various cancerous growth in your lifetime. So there is always a price to pay. So far, I have not been able to make the road an easily navigable one. It's a rough one, but there are hopes. Let's look at that. I will end my talk giving you some information, very new information, newer approaches to combat organ transplant. What do we see on the right-hand side? What is that thing up there? We see an animal, and there is a human head, and there are wings, and there are hooves. So, yes, you're right. So that's the official emblem for xenotransplant organization. Let's talk about animal organ transplant into human being, that is called xenotransplant. I will give you some, without going into the really detail, because this is even more complicated story. But I will give you some stories so that we all can understand easily. The first whole eye transplant had been used to restore the eyesight of this individual. I believe this is our veteran, got into a blast situation in the field that led to the loss of his facial and eyesight. US military veteran received the world's first whole eye transplant, also received a rare partial face transplant, and after surgery, donor eye maintained normal pressure, blood flow, and retained in size. And here is Aaron James, flanked by his family. That's a success story. During the surgery, doctors injected adult stem cells. These are the details from the donor's bone marrow into the optic nerves to encourage the growth and repair of the transplant eyes. He has made significant progress. A year later, has been able to resume his normal life. I'm pretty much back to being a normal guy doing the normal things. enjoying a day with his family. That's a success story. It has not been done before, and it has been done very recently. Next, take a look at xenotransplant. What is xenotransplantation? Any procedure that involves the transplant or implantation or infusion into a human being of the cells and tissues and organs from an animal source. Think about it. We are going out of species boundary. That's why it's defined as xenotransplant, cross-species transplant. These organs are coming from pigs. Yes, a particular breed of pigs, they are reared for one purpose, so that their organs can be harvested and transplanted into a human being when it is necessary. These experiments are going on for at least 2 to 3 decades. Different labs in US and across the world actually maintain this herd of pigs in the medical research buildings, very, very under tight control, almost germ-free environment, because many of those pigs, genetic elements has been changed through recombinant DNA technology, putting in human genes, taking out some of the genes from their body so that they make those pig organs more compatible with human immune system. And it may sound weird, but not the chimps, but the pigs anatomically are more closer to us than primates. That's why scientists chose these pigs. But in our ancient literature, there are references to experiments taking blood and skin from animals and using them in organ began in 1600s. So this is not a absolutely new thing, but we have embarked on the success story of this long endeavor, whether we use organs from an animal that can replace my damaged organ in a human being. Few more examples. Kidney xenotransplant. Because we have already established that kidneys are in the highest demand and in the longest waiting list. Therefore, 62-year-old patient with end-stage kidney disease received a genetically modified pig kidney last March, about a year back. This individual in 2018 had a human kidney transplant, but unfortunately it began to fail in 2023. The idea of pig kidney transplant began at that time. Patients received the transplant. Here is the pig kidney, and here is the team. Mr. Rick Slayman, the patient sitting here along with his partner, and here is the transplant team that transplanted the kidney into him. And that was one of the first instances of xenogenic transplant, pig kidney being transplanted into a human being. But unfortunately, this patient died in about 5 months after the transplant has happened. Scientists, clinicians are still trying to learn what happened there. Is it exclusively due to the kidney failure, transplant failure, or had he definitely pre-existing some conditions that may have accounted for his unfortunate death? If I am not too wrong, if my memory serves me well, what I can recall out of this clinical episode is that maybe he developed some form of cancer, maybe. Don't quote me on it, but he has some comorbidities, of course. But this was the first attempt to transplant a pig kidney, a xenogenic transplant, into a human being that served the patient for several months, but after that, the patient died. Liver transplant. First pig to human liver transplant recipient is doing very well at the time of report. 71-year-old individual from China became the first living person to receive a liver transplant from a genetically modified pig. And the 5th person reported to have received a pig organ. More than 2 weeks after the surgery, the man is doing very well. And here is the close-up view of the pig liver during the xenotransplant procedure. And this has been done in China, Xinjiang Hospital, Air Force Medical University in Xi'an, China. This is last year's information. So science is moving. Clinical science research is moving in an area where we are not limited waiting for a human organ transplant, but the species barrier has been broken. But it will take few more years or many more years to fine-tune it so that a person, type 1 diabetes, lifelong, loses kidney function, is not dying due to lack of transplant or maybe transplant rejection. Here's another story. Gene-edited pig kidney gives living donor a new lease of life. This has been done at NYU Langone Health System. What happened in this episode, the 10 gene-edited pig kidney that also had removal of immunogenic antigen and addition of 6 human transgenes, meaning these pigs are genetically changed in the lab setup, and they are strictly maintained within the lab environment, and they are mated there, they are reared there and kept for research. And at this point, they are also being tested as a possible organ donor. Idea is that we can't genetically modify a human being. That would be unethical. That's not doable. But we can do so with all the ethical considerations and keeping the safety protocols and etc. in a pig, in an animal. If we can do that, then and change the genetic makeup of that animal, then perhaps those organs coming harvested from those genetically modified animals such as pig will be more acceptable by our immune system, and there will be less rejection. That is the whole idea, whole goal, and that is short of the holy grail approach in organ transplant these days. So the gene-edited pig kidney is more compatible with human recipient and reduce the likelihood of rejection. And that is the goal. This is the team of doctors, and here is the patient. And hope Tuana Looney does well, because she had been on dialysis for 8 years due to kidney failure. So let's summarize what we have learned so far. Organ transplant is often the only choice for end-stage organ failure. There are more demands for organ transplant than available, with a long waiting time. It's important for us to register as a potential organ donor. Yes, every one of us can save 8 lives after our death. Successful organ transplant requires close match between the donor and the recipient antigens. That's the genetic differences between us. Matching tests are done to determine donor-recipient compatibility, and there will be always some gap. To cover that gap, we use immune suppressive drugs, but those immune suppressive drugs do have their own problems, such as development of cancer, development of infection, and various toxicities such as nephrotoxicities and etc. due to prolonged immune suppressive drug regimen. New approach to overcome these hurdles in the domain of organ transplant is xenotransplant, but so far the examples we have examined that met up with mixed success. I really thank you for your presence today. It's a bit chilly for Nevada standard. I understand. I lived many years in Chicago and Michigan. This is very pleasant for me. And Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks to our sponsor, CCU, and I open up the floor for any question that you may have. But before you ask me question, a disclaimer, I'm not a clinician. I'm basic scientist, immunologist, since I do teach these things, I know reasonably, but I am not a clinician. I would not and should not give you clinical advice, but I can guide you to the resources. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Mandal.
Thank you.
If we have questions, let me get the mic to you because we're recording and we want to make sure we get your questions. Start down here in the front. And then we have a question on Zoom I'll get to after the two of you.
I have two questions for you. If you are an older person, let's say, I'm going to say 75, do they go lower on the list, or is there no discrimination in terms of age? That's the first question.
Short answer is, I do not know that, but thinking of the ethical consideration that I have mentioned in that slide, age should not put someone at the back end of a list. Other thing I should mention, there was not much time, it's not really 1 through 1,000 of a serial list. It's rather a pool of individuals nationally. A pool may need kidneys. Okay. Then comes, who are these individuals who needs kidneys? What are their ages? I mentioned the age, weight, other physiological characteristics, racial backgrounds. Are they Caucasians? Are they Asians? Or are they African Americans background? All those things are considered. Age singularly would not put someone at the back end of the list. But if you really need details, I can find the information, or you can look into those hyperlinks that will get you the exact information you are looking. But as much I know, singularly age would not put anyone at the back end because that individual is 78-year-old. That would not put that individual later down the waiting list compared to a 54-year-old. But I can get you the correct information if you reach out to these.
I was curious because I have a friend who is on the list. I was curious. Also, if you want to donate, is there a point where you're too old to donate?
No,
Or is there
that
some-
answer is no, because I have mentioned that cadaveric means upon decease, usually the organs are procured or harvested upon decease. But the consideration is that those organs should be in a reasonable good shape, physiologically active, then that can be harvested even at an old age, early age, or upon death.
Oh, I was going to ask, why is the kidney the most popular organ?
That's a very good question. What is the percentages of people having, for example, high blood glucose level, diabetes? In the world, it is about 60% of the world population. That's one. There are many such debilitating, prolonged chronic condition that puts the kidney at a risk. And other consideration is that, yes, that's what I'm going at. Because the kidney is one of the most hardworking organ in our body, along with heart. Every minute, there is a number I'm forgetting, I should have remembered, that 1 liter or 1 point some liter of blood flows through the kidney, and it purifies the toxicities, impurities through our metabolism, everything that comes as a byproduct. Blood is purified, filtered in our kidney. So kidney filters out many toxic elements all regularly, every minute, every second. Because it is used so much, and there are other considerations, because of its hyper use, continuous use, due to what happens really in a high blood sugar patient, diabetic patient, it's not simply the high sugar level, but what that high sugar level does in terms of the epithelial cells, vasculature, that's our kidney. Kidneys, nephrons, tubules, that has epithelial, endothelial cells, they get damaged. They lose their filtering abilities, in simple words. Therefore, kidneys are the highly impacted organ due to diabetes, prolonged diabetes, and due to many other things, toxic. No, Kidney filters regularly our plasma proteins through many things. In the diabetes, high blood sugar does something else that's I was going to say. It's not just simply having high blood sugar level in our plasma, but when one has a chronic high blood sugar level in their plasma, that leads to other pathophysiologies. Those other pathophysiologies damages kidney, heart, and many other organs. It's called glycosylation. If I need to go to the more sciencey, it's called glycosylation, meaning a sugar molecule attached to many proteins, and those proteins gets messed up, and particularly kidney gets impacted through many different mechanisms that ends up loss of kidney function as one of the most profound impact of chronic long-term diabetes. But there are many other issues there. So that's how kidney becomes the most vulnerable and most in demand.
All right. Yeah, two fast questions. Yeah, I saw a brain transplant.
Right.
Can you speak to that? And the other one was, I remember a guy named Barney Clark, and I think he had an artificial heart. Is there any artificial heart instead of an organ?
Brain transplant, I have not found any scientific data. So artificial heart, whole heart transplant has happened. I have shown you the data. What more is common is changing the heart valves with artificial valve and diaphragms, etc. But whole heart and whole organ transplant data is here. You have kidney, pancreas, liver, intestine, heart, and lung. And number-wise, these are the numbers that has been done here. Here is the number. This is the ethnicity. Here's kidney is the highest, as I have said, followed by liver, and heart is about 4,500 heart transplant did happen. So whole heart transplant is a fact, and it does happen.
Artificial heart?
Oh, artificial, I'm forgetting about that word. No, whole heart artificial, no such device has been developed. But artificial heart valves and etc., that is in place. No whole heart. There's a heart-lung machine, but that is not a transplant. Patient is hooked up to that machine for some time. No, the answer is no there. You're welcome.
Okay, we have a couple of Zoom questions. Let me get those first, and then we'll get the rest from the audience.
Yes.
This is from Parth Shindal.
Earth, yes, I know him. He's my
Organ
student.
transplant, as MHCs are utilized to identify the match from human to human, does it remain the same for interspecies transplant as well?
Yes, thanks, Parth. I'm glad that you could find some time. Parth Sinde is my student researcher back in India. I forwarded him the Zoom link, and he has attended this seminar. Yes, the HLA, human leukocyte antigen, and that's in human. Its counterpart, MHC, major histocompatibility complex antigen in mouse, they are synonymous. In human, we call it HLA. That antigen got to be matched if we talk about a xenogenic transplant, meaning taking a pig kidney, transplanting or needing to be transplanted into human being. To mitigate the differences, allogenic differences in HLA between that pig and human being, many of the pig HLA antigens has been replaced with recombinant DNA technology, meaning these are recombinant pigs. They carry many of the human genes in them so that they are more closer to us, our human HLA antigens repertoire. I'm using a couple of scientific terminology here, so that they are easier to be transplanted, and hopefully those types of transplanted individuals will require less amounts and duration of immunosuppressive drug regimen. But short answer is yes, HLA antigens got to be matched even in the context of a xenogenic transplant.
Okay, another question. We'll do these Zoom questions, and I'll get to all the rest of you. A question from Regina. Why does tacromylus become toxic to the kidney after being on it for a long, and how long does it take to become toxic?
I do not have the exact answer. Nephrotoxicity, yes, we talk about nephrotoxicity, but the exact mechanism for nephrotoxicity out of cyclosporine or tacrolimus, I'm sorry, I could not answer you that question straightforward. As much I remember, the molecular mechanism of cyclosporine or tacrolimus is it inhibits the calcineurin enzyme that is involved in the T cell activation pathway. But that inhibition of calcineurin enzyme in T cell activation creates immunosuppression. But its molecular mechanism of nephrotoxicity after prolonged use of cyclosporine or tacrolimus, I cannot give you that answer. I apologize for that lack of information to provide to you right now, but if you can get back to me or if I can get your contact information, I will sure be able to provide you with that answer. But how long? Now, the second question was how long it takes. There is not a hard and fast number there because every patient requires their immunosuppressive tacrolimus regimen dosage level is different, their physiology is different, their weight, etc., all are different. And what is the gap there we are trying to cover, creating immunosuppression with the use of tacrolimus, all are different. But everything considering, it's several years, at least more than 6 years, close to, I would say, 10 years before a significant nephrotoxicity due to cyclosporine tacrolimus is seen in the patient who are under that regimen.
Okay, and then we have a 2 or 3 part question from Mia Ha. What is the longest patient to survive on a kidney transplant? And let's see, what is the percentage that necessarily need dialysis? And, oh yeah, okay, let's go with that.
Okay, can you please repeat the first question?
Yeah, let's see, what is the longest patient to survive on a kidney transplant?
Again, I am not a clinician, so I have to depend on the data that I have shown. Kidney transplant survival averages about 22 plus years. That's a long time survival for a kidney transplant patient. Next question.
Okay, let's see. What are the medications that taking long-term will lead to organ failure? Is that tacrolimus?
Yes, so here is the group of drugs that are used for, let me bring that drug information. For kidney, usually tacrolimus and mycophenolate mofetil and corticosteroids, that's been used in 66% of the individuals, combination of 3 drugs, whereas about 27-30% individuals depends on such tacrolimus or cyclosporine plus mycophenolate mofetil. So it's a combination of either 3. That is the mostly used drug to create immunosuppression in kidney transplant scenario, whereas tacrolimus plus mycophenolate mofetil in about 30% of the individuals.
Okay, and the last part of our question was what percentage of patients necessarily have to go on dialysis before they're transplanted?
I would not be able to answer that question that way because as I have described, the necessity for organ transplant is when an organ reaches end-stage organ failure, stage 4 or 5. So it's not a percentage, rather what stage that individual is in their functionality of kidney function or any other organ function that will determine their necessity for transplant. But when a kidney, a patient with kidney malfunction reaches you asked me about the dialysis. Dialysis, yes, there are, you have to look into the creatine kinase clearance test, glomerular filtration rate, all those. There is a number, creatine kinase, and those numbers, I think when glomerular filtration rate goes beyond certain percentile, I think it's 1.2 or something, then they require dialysis. But
Okay.
Once they are dialysis, they can maintain the dialysis for many years, and at one point, the dialysis starts failing or failing, then they achieve or they become end-stage kidney failure, then they go for a transplant. That's the stage-specific sort of answer. But specific exact numbers, I would be able to give you if you reach back to me. I simply don't recall the exact percentile numbers here.
Okay, thank you. And here,
Thank you.
you're next. Oh, she's got the mic here. She was next.
Okay. Doctor, you are an immunologist.
Yes, I am.
What is your opinion with the outpouring of a lot of supplementation in the market that claims to improve your immune system? This is away from the transplant.
I know, yes. I'll give you a quick answer. I gave a talk a few years back. Maybe I will offer that talk once again. As an immunologist, they have very little value. Patients, individuals spend a lot of money. The supplement market, probiotics, immune boosting therapies, all those things have multi-billion-dollar markets. They are not regulated. Nowhere there is a clinical trial necessary by our current FDA and other regulatory authorities. So it's almost person's belief that if I take this supplement, I will perform better in these areas of my physiology. As a scientist, they have very little scientific evidence, clinical evidence to support what they do claim. There could be some, but properly validated clinical data is lacking. Based on that, I personally do not have much value for immune boosting or any other supplements that are out in the market. But that is not to say they don't have any. They may have some, but it's not clinically tested or validated through rigorous research and clinical testing.
Okay.
Just a follow-up of that. Since as we age, our immune system
Goes
is
down.
being depleted.
Yes.
And all of us who are seniors are trying to hold on or look for something that would improve our immune system. So I think we spend so much money, on those supplementation that it should be regulated and it should be put to the public whether they are really effective or not.
This is the industry versus opinion making question. Yes, we can stay little. I'm in that category, entering that era where my immune system is down compared to 20 years back, but simply taking those supplement will not help me. They are rather practicing healthy practices such as minimum exercise, good balanced diet, etc., and stress-free life is much better option rather than spending money on immune boosting supplements and etc.
Yes.
Yeah, if I wanted to create an organ bank for 5 to 10 years from now, and I was willing to spend a lot of money, could I have a transgenic pig created that matched my genotypes, and I would have my organ bank standing by?
It is doable if you are willing to. Perhaps I cannot give you the exact number. In the upper region of $1 million, we'll get you a swine herd. I worked with one such university many years back when I first got into US, Chicago Med School. Down below in the basement, there was a swine herd, and there was a herder who used to take care of those pigs. So their operating budget was $500,000 25 years back. So I do not know how much it will cost now, but it's doable. Technically, it's doable. If you have enough money to put in and hire people and raise a herd of pigs for xenogenic transplant, technically, scientifically, it's doable. Yeah, sort of. No, not for a pig. To maintain a herd of pigs for transplant purposes, it's not one animal, but it's the entire facility, like a huge complex like that. They have to be germ-free. There has to be vet. There has to be scientists. There has to be caretaking for those. More than an individual, a human being gets care. Yes, transplant is, but he is talking about facility. Transplant is covered under, yes, Medicare, Medicaid, and regular insurances. Yes. Yes, please.
Yeah. While I was waiting, by the way, I Googled the longest living kidney transplants. The longest living kidney transplant survivor I noted was 50 years, Angela Dunn. Anyway, my question,
Thank you for sharing that information.
it was a long wait.
This long.
Anyway,
Yeah.
couple of things, National Registry, how that works. I've got a daughter-in-law who's headed there, or well, I don't know if she's actually registered, but once she becomes eligible, reaches that stage, do you know how that works as far as if she's identified a match, does that mean she gets?
Yes, sure. Again, she will register herself. Then registering requires some blood sample taken from her body to establish her genotype and different antigenic expression. That will be introduced along with all her vitals, her age, her body weight, and etc., into the national matching system. Then people who already pledged to donate, they have their blood groups entered in there. Cadaveric donors, means harvested organs, they will be means identified or tested what is their antigenic expression, genetic backgrounds, and etc. Then comes the geographical location of the patient and kind of where this organ is available. So there are many moving parts. It's not a, as I mentioned before briefly, it's not a serial order. Many factors are considered along with the urgency for transplant, along with that geographical location, genetic background, genetic match, physiological nature, overall, how old is this individual's age and etc., racial background, all those things. That all comes into the play to come to an offer stage from those national database individuals, administrators. Here we have a probable match for you. Then the communication begins. Then there will be further testing. That will be done very quickly because one cannot hold a organ to be transplanted for, there is a certain window of time, it's within 48 hours or something, not more than that.
There's a shelf life.
Yes, shelf life, so-called shelf life is a very, very limited tight. And we want to keep it that way so that after all these hurdles, we got a match and the organ got a little bit wasted on the shelf. We do not want that. From that point, it moves very quickly. But prior to that, many factors comes into play to come up with the match and informing the recipient, would-be recipient, that yes, we have found a match for you.
Okay, that was my hypothetical
Is
as
it-
far with her, because she doesn't have an exact match. But my son, her husband, apparently he's willing to donate a kidney, and that somehow affects her standing on the registry. Are you familiar with that process?
No, I am
Okay.
not. I am not. Better consult those websites that I have shown into that. I can, if you email me, I can write down my email address. I can send you those links. It's a little complicated process. Those are some ethical considerations. Yes, I'm a family member. I'm willing to donate. Most likely she would be out of that waiting list, most likely, but don't quote me on it.
Yeah.
Most likely because she is not trying to procure an organ out of the pool. She has found her own donor. So what prevents her to have the surgery done and the transplant being done? But don't quote me on it. I will give you the links and I'll write my email address and I'll send you those links so you can a little bit look into it. But if I am depending on my rationale and logic, because I'm not a clinician, as I mentioned, most likely she is not dependent on that list because she can take herself short of out of that list, not willing to wait on the pool of the donated pledged organs. I have found my own match, sort of. in that
Another
sense.
question related to, and I'm familiar with him, I've met with him several times not related to this,
Mhm.
but because my association with a financial donor. But Nevada Donor Network, which I don't know if
Yeah.
everyone's familiar with that on organ donors, but what specific, I know it's, their name is Nevada Donor Network,
Yeah.
but it's all based on a registry. And I know they just got a $10-15 million grant, I think, from federal government. What, do they provide any specific advantage to Nevada? And are they
Being a
mainly
Nevada resident?
harvesting, but not, I don't know how many kidney or liver or heart transplants are performed in Nevada, but does that help Nevadans, specifically Nevada Donor
That,
Network?
just that grant money?
No, the organization, Nevada Donor Network.
So these are the pivotal organization. Each state has their own organization. And then there is a central nationwide organization. These are many tier umbrella organizations in each state. Then there are national organizations. There are always crosstalks between the state because procurement got to be done at the state level. Sure. What exactly their spatial and interrelationships in terms of benefits versus, I really cannot speak about that, but this is the structure. Every state has their own state level organizations, and then overall on top of, there are federal level of organizations. They all crosstalk to each other through their computing system. So there must be some benefit there, but what exactly is the benefit? Nevada is a sparsely populated state. There are not many transplants are happening here. So being a transplant would-be recipient, being a Nevadan would be an advantage. I can't really answer that question. I would not know that.
Other than partial heart, such as valves,
Perhaps.
are there full organ transplants in Nevada, in Las Vegas area?
Yeah, UMC does,
Okay.
UMC and I think St. Rose Hospital is equipped to do organ transplant. And in Utah, University of Utah Medical. Yeah.
Okay. One more here. and I'll give you.
This is about very early stage research. I read really huge numbers of journals, and there was some very early research going on a couple of years ago. Seems to have died down in the journals, but they were trying to grow organs like a heart on a scaffold with stem cells.
Right.
And it was actually making some decent progress. I visited, actually, I think it was at Stanford. It was a
Yes,
project.
Stanford Lab, yes.
Do you know how that's progressing?
It's a mixed story. So yes, the bioscaffolding being created, and on top of that, scientists would start seeding pluripotent hematopoietic stem cells through which all the cells in our body comes in, and hoping with proper stimulation through cytokines and chemokines, that scaffolding in the shape of a heart or kidney will kind of transform and grow into a kidney or heart specific organs. There is no success yet. That's the short answer. The research is going on for over many decades now. Success is varied between, success means no complete success. It's still an ongoing research. Hopefully that will come to fruition someday, but not today. But that effort still continues. Artificial organ generation in the lab is done, particularly using animal models and things like that, insects and etc. It is ongoing process, but it might take many more years to accomplish that.
Oh, hold on just a second. Hold on just a moment for the microphone. Let me get this gentleman first. I'll be right to you in a moment.
Good question.
By the way, to address your question about the Nevada Donor Network, UNOS, and I don't know if you're aware of this, UNOS in 2020 modified their donation cascade.
I do not
And
know
it
that.
actually now favors coastal states and has caused much larger number of organs going to waste. And yeah,
Yeah,
and
big
as a result, many inland, well, they just don't get transported. It's the administrative
As simple
process.
as that. Yeah, transportation is a
Yeah,
factor.
and so as a result, inland states have been more active about creating more or stronger internal networks, including three-way swaps, what you're talking about. You donate an organ, your relative doesn't get the organ, but they enter a swap process. And that's going through mainly inland states because they're being discriminated against since 2020. That's an administrative problem.
Okay, yeah, I completely not aware of that. So there are many nuances in this. It's
Yeah.
not very straightforward in any ways, but thanks
By the
for
way,
sharing. that.
besides valves, there is a left ventricular assist device to
Yes.
assist
To assist,
patients
yes,
waiting for
biomedical
transplant.
engineering, marvels of biomedical engineering.
Absolutely.
That's working very fantastic.
Right.
Heart valve transplant.
Are you, clinical question, are you aware of beam technology, which is base editing of immune process?
Yes, sort of, not really expert on it, but.
Oh, no,
what-
just that was being used for transplant for immune suppression
Yes,
instead of tacrolimus.
yeah, tacrolimus,
Yeah.
yes.
They're using it as an alternative to actually
Yes.
suppress.
So, yes, so that's a very promising research approach. What essentially it entails is that instead of putting the patient under immunosuppressive drug regimen, can I make the patient tolerize transplanted organ, even there is a gap, there are differences. That tolerization protocol, yeah, when I was at University of Chicago, Jeff Bluestone, who is the pioneer of this tolerization technology and research, he was working on that about 25 years back. It has been progressed. It has progressed, but it has not progressed. Clinical trials off and on has happened, but it has not progressed to a point where that there is an accepted clinical protocol approved by FDA or other regulatory bodies. But that's, I did not mention, just to keep it simple, but yes, tolerization is another approach away from immune suppression. I would create a tolerization state in me so that I can tolerize the transplanted organs.
Oh, this is regarding the growing cells on scaffolds. That technology, they keep trying with that, but so far it hasn't worked out. But it's been superseded. We could now 3D print organs, and that seems to have a better shot.
Yeah, 3D printed only can print the scaffolding. It cannot print human cells. So the biomaterial of scaffolding that were used in a different fashion, that can be generated by a 3D printer, but a printed material is not a live cell. It's a material, biomaterial.
And you use those in the 3D printer.
I have not heard such a research yet, but it might come one day. Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello.
Sorry. Hello.
So once someone has successfully received their organ,
Yes.
clearly we have a goal that they're not going to become infected with anything, right? Because their immune system has
It's
been
down.
affected.
Yes,
So we're giving them drugs to suppress their immune system.
that's right.
Well, how are we feeling about vaccines? Because don't vaccines require an immune response? So
Yes,
what is is there conflict or?
Yes, very good question. Thank you for asking that. Again, due to lack of time, did not veer out to that. They are the prime candidate to receive vaccines against COVID, vaccines against seasonal influenza, vaccines against any other respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, any infection that may circulate, may impact the pneumococcal vaccine, they should receive the vaccine first. But there is a caveat. Those vaccines, the way that will work in an immune sufficient individual who is not under immune suppressive regimen or drugs, it will not work the same way. It will work at a lower level, but it's lower titer, various ways, T cell activation, lower antibody titer, but it's never all or none. Even if we say this is the full-length immune response in an immune sufficient individual with a pneumococcal vaccine or a seasonal influenza or our COVID-19 booster dose. For an immune suppressant patient, that same vaccine may generate this level of immune protection or antibody titer. That's still much better than none. So it's never all or none. And they are the prime candidate. They should take extra precaution. They should keep wearing these KN95 masks, particularly during winter months when everything is enclosed and recirculated air, they're traveling in an airplane or congested airport and etc. They should take all the precautions. Along with that, they should be updated on all the recommended and available vaccines, and they are the first candidate in the line whenever there is a newly approved vaccine or a new version of an updated vaccine comes out in the market. There are many research being done exactly focusing on immunosuppression patient, particularly in the category of transplant patient in US, in Israel, and many other places. Very qualified article that showed that how even the early COVID-19 vaccines given to those patient populations saved their lives. So there is absolutely necessity and value to have them, give them required immunizations. Even those immunizations are, maybe I can avoid that immunization today, but those patients under immunosuppressive drugs, by religion, they should take it. That will keep them protected. Yes, she has a question there. Okay.
So what about live vaccines for
Yes.
someone with an organ transplant?
Wow, how do you know that?
I'm a pharmacy student. Hi.
Okay, so you know the answer. What's the answer?
No.
Yes, thank you. Live attenuated vaccines should not be administered given to patient on immunosuppressive drug regimen as simple as that. Steroid on certain numbers, you know that this amount of milligram per kilogram body weight and etc. over 4 to 6 weeks of period of time. They should not take live attenuated vaccine. Now, if there is a comparable vaccine, such as Flumist is a nasal live attenuated vaccine for seasonal influenza. There is a Fluvax-Fluvirin injectable killed vaccine. They should get the killed vaccine rather at a high dose killed vaccine, not the live attenuated vaccine. That's a no-no. Why? You know the answer, but it might trigger those live attenuated bugs into a virulent form and cause disease or infection because they don't have immune protection abilities.
Right. Okay, we have two last questions. Can a patient survive longer with multiple transplants? I'm assuming in a row?
The survival will be long, but it will, if the first kidney transplant gives someone 20 years, second will definitely not give them 20 years. The number of longevity for the second one goes down because of their ravaged immune systems and many other things does happen in that context. It's just not the organ transplant, but many other factors kicks in because they are not only received a transplant, but they were on many various immunosuppressive drugs that impacted their overall physiology. So as many transplants happens, the overall longevity from 1 to 2 to 3, that sequentially goes down.
Okay, and the last question is again from Parth. Where do we see the gene editing technology or CRISPR technology in such fields as the existing system requires a heavy cash flow and is not providing 100% efficiency?
That's the base, that's actually gene. That's base editing.
That's base editing, Parth, that's Cas9, CRISPR technology is being used to develop those pig populations that will be used for xenogenic transplant, and CRISPR-Cas9 technology will only enhance it because that's a new technology being used to create the COVID-19 vaccine, and that will certainly be very useful to develop xenogenic transplant models and animals. Thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you so much for all your questions and for coming. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Dr. Mandal, and good night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. Good night.